Right, good morning everyone and welcome to your reading lesson. It's been a while since you've seen me, but I'm back for the rest of this week. So let's dive straight in with that Stanley. Now, I've not been here to read it, but I do know that you're at the part where Stanley and Arthur have gone to the park and Arthur really wants to fly a kite. So let's find out what happens. I think you can tell from the cover what is going to happen, but we'll see. First things first, little test, little quiz for you. There are 4 words here, all of them missing the I sound. All got the I sound missing. But what I sound goes for each word? Okay, so see if you can write down each of these words, but with the different I sounds. You've got pie, you've got light, you've got kite, and you've got sigh. Give you a few. You can pause the video, have a think. Right, let's see how you did. Now, for pie, you should have hopefully got I, E. For light, you should have got I, G, H. For kite, it's that split I sound. And then for sigh, it's just like light, the I, G, H. Okay, so well done if you've got those. If you didn't, don't worry. You know, there's a lot of I sounds. It can be tricky. Just keep practicing them in your phonics and stuff, and you'll get there. Right, retrieval. We all know what retrieval is, but just in case, it's when you take the answer from the text. So your answer should really just be like a direct quote that you've retrieved, pulled it out, put into your answer, okay? So let's have a read of the section for today. Stanley remembered what his parents had said. He went to a boy whose kite was broken and borrowed a large spool of string. So have a think, what could spool mean? That might come up in the questions later. A large spool of string. You can fly me, Arthur, he said. Come on. He attached the string to himself and gave Arthur the spool to hold. He ran lightly across the grass, sideways to get up speed, and then he turned to meet the breeze. Up, up, up went Stanley, being a kite. He knew just how to manage on the gusts of wind. He faced full into the wind if he wanted to rise, and let it take him from behind when he wanted speed. He had only to turn his thin edge to the wind, carefully, a little at a time, so that it did not hold him. And then he would slip gracefully down towards the earth again. Arthur let out all the string, and Stanley soared high above the trees, a beautiful sight in his red shirt and blue trousers, against the pale blue sky. Everyone in the park stood still to watch. Stanley swooped right and then left in long matched swoops. He held his arms by his sides and zoomed at the ground like a rocket and curved up again towards the sun. He side-slipped and circled and made figure eights and crosses and a star. It was very busy in the air. Nobody has ever flown the way Stanley Lambchop flew that day. Probably no one ever will again. Okay, so let's start with our first practice question. The question says, how did Stanley manage with the gusts of wind? Now, we have our 4 steps to answer retrieval questions. Our first step is to underline the key words in the question. So I'm going to get my pen, but for you, pencil, and go, right, well, I need to find out about gusts of wind and how Stanley managed it. Okay, that seems doable. So after I underline, I then need to find. So I'm going to go back and go, right, here the mouse is my skimming finger, and I need to find where it says anything about gusts of wind or the word managed. Ooh. He knew just how to manage the gusts of wind. Okay. So I underlined, then I had to find. Now I need to read around. So he knew just how to manage on the gusts of wind. He faced full into the wind if he wanted to rise, and let it take him from behind when he wanted speed. Does that answer my question? How does Stanley manage with the gusts of wind? Yes, it does. So if I can answer it, that he faced full into the wind. It's fine to go back because it's quite a big bit that I'm retrieving. So it's fine to double check. If he wanted to rise. And then if I wanted, I could go into more detail and say a bit more about his how he slows down as well. But that is a good enough answer. So let's go on to the second question. Stanley wore a blue shirt and red trousers. Now, is that true or is that false? First step is to underline the key word. So I'm looking for if he wore a blue shirt and red trousers. So I'm going to go back and now I need to find. So I know it's probably going to be after this because the last question was on this. So I'm going to keep skimming. Ooh, red shirt and blue trousers. Just double check the question again. That's asking for blue shirt and red trousers. Well, that says red shirt and blue trousers. So that would make it false. And there's my answers. Right, now it's your turn. Underline, find, read around it. Then you can write your answer. 4 steps, follow them. Okay. Oh, give the meaning of the word spool. We were talking about spool earlier. It's almost as if I wrote the questions. Who knows? So here are your first 4 questions. You can pause it here and have a look, and then I'll move down so you can see the others. Okay, so hopefully you've made note of those questions. So now I'm going to move down. And here are the remainder of your questions for today. So pause, have a go. Right, let's go through the answers. So if you haven't given it a go yet, please pause it, do the questions, then press play because we're about to reveal the answers. Almost like a spoiler alert for films. Big spoiler alert, I'm about to tell you the answers, so make sure you have done the questions. Right, so give the meaning of the word spool. Now, it talked about to do with string and that you need it for your kite. So the spool is actually the thing you hold that the string is wrapped around. So when the kite is in the air, you're holding that spool rather than just holding onto string. It's like a little handle. So anything to do with handle for the string of a kite. Or you could have the roll for it or anything like that is acceptable. How did Stanley run across the grass? So hopefully we underlined grass and how did he run, then go back and go, run across the grass. Use my skimming finger. Oh, he's running across the grass. How did he do it? Lightly. So hopefully we wrote the answer lightly. How high does Stanley fly? I'm going to underline I'm looking for how high when he's flying. So I know this is where he starts flying, up, up, up. It's a nice way to do it. So skimming, looking for something about how high he was. Nothing really there. Ah, high. So now I need to read around it. And Stanley soared high above the trees. Oh, how I can now write my answer, because how high did Stanley fly? Love a good rhyme. Is above the trees. Lovely stuff. Right, name 3 of the things Stanley did while flying. 3 of the things Stanley did while he was flying. So go back. I know it's probably going to be after this. I need to find things that Stanley did while he was up in the air being a kite. So I know he's in the air now because it's all after up, up, up. So Stanley swooped right and then left in long match swoops. He held his arms by his side and zoomed at the ground like a rocket and curved up again towards the sun. He side-slipped and circled and made figure 8s and crosses and a star. So any of those are acceptable, as is swooping, as is zooming, as is being a rocket, as is curved. There's so many answers, you just got to make sure you've got 3 of them. Okay, any of those 3 is absolutely fine. Right. Why do you think no one will ever fly that way again? So this is referring to the last line of this section. Nobody has ever flown the way Stanley Lamshot flew that day. Probably no one ever will again. Now, I can't tell you this is the answer, because this is why do you think. But as long as it's on the lines of, because chances are no one else is going to be flat like Stanley, no one else is going to be in his position, then you've got the right answer. Like, how many people do you know who get squished by a bulletin board and become flat as a pancake? Probably Stanley's the only one, right? So he's a very unique person. So it's because he's so unique. So if you anything like that about how he is unique is absolutely spot on. Right, now we're on to our true and falses. It says, Stanley stole the string from a boy. Did he steal the string from a boy? Stanley remembered what his parents had said. He went to a boy whose kite was broken and borrowed a large spool of string. Oh, he borrowed it. Didn't steal it, he borrowed it. So I'm going to tick false. Arthur had a turn flying as well. Well, I don't even need to go back to text, because I already know from up here, no one is ever going to fly the way Stanley flew. So it's unlikely that Arthur also flew. So it's going to be false. And then Stanley moved in all directions. Now, the directions that I know are up, down, left, and right. So let's have a look, see if I can see those. So I've got right here. I've got left here. He's zooming at the ground and he's curving up. So he's gone all the different directions. Lovely. So that must be true. And then finally, what was Stanley compared to when he zoomed to the ground? So I've got my key phrase there, zoomed to the ground. I know what that is because I've already looked at it loads of times. I'm going to read around it. He held his arms by his sides and zoomed at the ground like a rocket and curved up again toward the sun. So how was he, what was he compared to? Don't know why I'm doing it like that. I'm going to do it like that. A rocket. Well done if you got those answers. Don't worry if on a few of them you struggled. They were really tough questions today. All right. Thanks very much for joining in your reading lesson. I'll see you in not too long a time for you for your maths lesson. All right. Thanks everyone. Bye.